Welcome to the Womlex Show, episode number 42. The Womlex Show is presented to you by Bright Payment, Debt Agency, and Spryker. Today, my guest is Brian Beck. He is one of the most known experts in e-commerce, especially B2B Ecommerce in the US. And I'm talking with Brian Beck about the differences between Europe and US when it comes to e-commerce development and COVID effects. It was a super interesting session, so we actually decided to have a second episode recorded in a couple of weeks where we deep dive into some of the cases he's describing in his book about B2B e-commerce transformational projects. But please listen to the first episode first about the general market characteristics and how he values the changes of COVID-19. Brian, welcome to the Womlex Show. I'm really proud having you here on the show. Our first speaker from the United States, actually. We've been focusing usually on the Netherlands and Nordics in Europe, Sweden, and Norway. But today I'd like to learn a little bit more about the winners and losers in B2C and B2B e-commerce in the US. And there's no one who could explain that better than you. Maybe you can give a brief overview about your vast experience in the e-commerce industry.
Sure, Alex. Well, I'm grateful to be here, and thank you for the opportunity. And I'm really honored to be your first U.S. speaker. That's great. Well, so yeah, just to give you a bit of background on me. So I've been in the e-commerce field for over 20 years, since 1999. That just makes me old. And I've been most of my career in operating roles. So most of the time I've been running e-commerce for businesses here in the United States, mainly retailers, mainly selling consumer products. So companies like PacSun, which sells apparel, Pacific Sunwear, California. Harbor Freight Tools, which is a chain of about 700 stores across the United States. And I ran their e-commerce businesses. And, so a lot of my experience, and these days my thought leadership and the book I've published all have to do with, my experience doing that and then translating it in the case of the book into B2B e-commerce channels. So I published a book called $1 Billion B2B E-commerce in the spring of 2020 amidst COVID. And so we, the timing, I think, actually was quite interesting of publishing that, just given the fact that, the world is now turning more and more to digital and digital means and e-commerce to connect with customers. So happy to be here. Thanks for having me. And I'm excited about our conversation.
Very cool. So maybe let's start with a little bit more superficial topic on first glance. So when we are talking about e-commerce in Europe, especially in Central Europe, UK, Germany, Switzerland, and you would use the term e-commerce in a street conversation, so people would say, it's about Amazon or Zalando, and e-commerce is killing the inner cities. There's no inner city concept in the US, but it has a very, very sensitive thing about talking e-commerce. Yeah. So it's of course, booming now for years. It has in some areas, especially in fashion, over 20% of a market share already. But if you would ask people rating, do you like e-commerce or not? Usually you would see not a thumbs up. So what have you seen in the US in the last 10 years?
Yeah, interesting. And I love this not dichotomy, but similarities too, that we can talk through about our two markets. In the U.S., the consumer has strongly voted for e-commerce in terms of its adoption. The consumer, in terms of even as we work through this pandemic, has turned increasingly to e-commerce. Has e-commerce and the large marketplaces like Amazon and others been a reason for the decline in some of the traditional retail channels? I think, you've seen, I think what they've done really is raise the bar, right? If you think about where the consumer is voting to spend their dollars and where the B2B buyer is as well, that is moving largely to e-commerce. So I think it's a fairly complex dynamic when you compare Europe to the US, and in terms of where the dynamics are somewhat different. Because, for example, in the US, we have a lot of retail square footage, per person versus Europe. I think it's something like 7 or 8 times the amount of square footage for retail stores. So as you see more and more shifts into the consumer's preference for e-commerce, that is a critical a factor that's causing a decline in things like the shopping malls in the United States and traditional retail. And what it's done is it's said to retailers and other resellers of product, you need to raise your game and you need to invest in digital channels in a way that you maybe haven't in the past. And those that haven't in the past have now experienced real challenges. And it's being set by Amazon, but frankly, it's being set by all the more advanced e-commerce players here in the United States. We have digital native brands here that are connecting with consumers and business buyers like never before, using digital native platforms to make that connection. So the bar has gone up, and not every company has kept up. So you have winners and you have losers, right?
Okay, and I will tell you what I usually say to brick and mortar retail store owners. Let's say you're like a brick and mortar store owner, let's say 20, 30, 40 stores in different shopping malls in the US. And I will tell you my answer in a minute, but what is your answer when those people ask you, okay, Brian, I know Amazon is winning, I know malls are dying, I don't have the competences yet when it comes to e-commerce, and I'm selling shoes. Yeah. So what should I do?
What should you do? That's the question. So, well, I think, what if these digitally native brands and marketplaces like Amazon have taught us nothing else, it's that we need to be focused on the customer and establishing a relationship that's not just about price and selection. It needs to be about understanding and a deeper connection with that customer. And so if you're selling shoes, you need to understand where and how that customer is, for example, going to use those shoes. I give a great example, actually, in the shoe category. I've for years studied the company REI. I don't know if you're familiar with them. It's a recreational equipment, and they make sporting goods. They're one of the largest, retail sporting goods. They're one of the largest sporting goods retailers here in the United States. Okay, so they hundreds of stores, advanced e-commerce effort, fully omnichannel. Okay, so tying that back to shoes, what do they do differently than, say, an Amazon does or some of their competitors do? Well, when you buy a product from REI, you're going to they have a profile, and they understand your profile across all the different channels. They're going to understand, your e-commerce behavior. They're going to understand your in-store behavior. That's called CRM, or customer relationship management. And when you buy something on their e-commerce site, for example, I buy a pair of hiking shoes, right? What do I get from REI 2 weeks later? Well, I get an email telling me where I can use those hiking shoes or boots by my house, in my area, how I can use them, and what else I might need for my trip. It's not just about promotion. It's about establishing a deeper connection with the customer and then talking to them about how they can use the products from that retailer in the field. Amazon doesn't do that. Other companies that aren't as advanced don't do that. So when you think about what's the new bar in retail? It's about, and brand marketing, by the way, too. It's about making sure that you have a more than just a price and selection connection with your customer. And that starts by understanding the customer at a fundamental level and having the systems and technology to be able to understand them at that level and really deliver a personalized experience. I mean, humans have, Alex, I don't know if you ever saw the statistic here in the United States. There was a study done about 5 years ago by the U.S. Center of Biotechnology, and they measured the attention span of a human versus a goldfish. Okay, now I'm not sure how they measured the attention span of a goldfish. However, the human has a lower attention span now, apparently, than a goldfish does. Our attention span is down to something like 8 seconds. So my point is just, as human beings, we have no attention span. We're constantly distracted with our mobile phones and with other things. And so for a retailer or a brand, you have less time than ever to connect with that customer and deliver a relevant experience, and then connect with them beyond just a product and a price, but connect with them with an experience like REI has done. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it totally makes sense. So, but let us take a moment at our REI. So we have similar businesses in Europe. So in Germany, probably most known for outdoor hiking equipment is Globetrotter. It was like the multi-channel, omnichannel case in Germany for years, almost
Mhm.
bankrupt actually. And I tell you why in a minute. Then Sportcheck, which was part of the Otto Group, also very dominant online and offline, but really failing. And what we learned or what we saw over the last years is that this kind of retail brick and mortar operations was very expensive. They couldn't focus on a superior experience in brick and mortar. Therefore, they couldn't neither focus on a superior experience online, so they lost traffic to Zalando or which is kind of Zappos in the US. So this kind of case you have described was kind of the hiking wear. It was there in theory, and from like 100,000 products, maybe 100 products have been served this kind of customer journey,
Right.
but most products have not been served this customer journey. And there comes like the so-called omnichannel dilemma. So 80% of all the efforts went into the connection between brick and mortar and online, but they should have focused on either online or offline. From nowadays perspective, it's essentially online. So there's, if you ask me, like for European case, there's from like the bigger company, there's not one successful case when it came to omnichannel or multi-channel transformation. So some companies managed to become like the online dominant players in their category. For example, Thomann, which is like the audio equipment player in Europe, with like 1 billion in revenue, which is a lot like for the European market.
Sure.
But most players like Globetrotter, like the REIs of Europe, they failed. So maybe you know the numbers from REI better, but would you say from a today's perspective they kind of mastered the omnichannel games, or they know how to equip brick and mortar stores plus run a very successful online business?
I think there's a number of cases. So number one, I think that whole market is still evolving, and I think you have cases where some companies are doing it better than others, and there's individual cases. I gave you the REI example. Are you familiar with a company called Sephora? Do you know who that is?
Yes.
So Sephora has a really, I think, done a good job of sort of the omni-channel, tying the store together with digital. Now, in the U.S., and it may be different than the EU. In the U.S., we still believe that there is a very significant portion of business that will continue to happen offline. So even today with COVID, our e-commerce penetration went from 16 to 30% in 2 months. Crazy. And I'm sure you're seeing similar things in the EU. Yes. But even with that, some of those behaviors are going to sustain. But what it does is it makes the digital and the mobile phone, and that makes it more important. But most analysts, and I believe too, that there still will remain a very large percentage of offline transactions happening. So what Sephora has done is quite a few different things to kind of tie those things together. They've experimented with a lot of different. One of the things they did, which I think is actually really interesting, they have an innovation lab. So they created a whole group to think about how do we better connect with the customer using digital means. And so they have, for example, a graphic art online artists. It's an AI or artificial intelligence simulator that allows customers to try on makeup virtually, and then the store associates are notified of these things. These are the kinds of tools that are driving relevant experiences for the customer, and helping them to more effectively experience the in-store side of the business as well as the virtual side. So it's an interesting, and they of course have a significant e-commerce business as well. I think about $1 billion of their revenue is e-commerce, which is pretty large. So a significant penetration of e-commerce, but also a lot of the things they've done to sort of cross-channel. Another example is a company called Home Depot. You're probably familiar with Home Depot.
Yes.
So Home Depot has more than half of its orders placed online are actually picked up in the store. And so closing the gap and between the digital, what's presented on the e-commerce site, and the digital experience with what's in the store, with the store experience, is really important. And to your point you were making earlier, Alex, they may have 100,000 products, but only 100 products are enabled with these experiences. Yeah, these are not small investments. These are not things that they require people, they require technology, and they take time. And so, I think through this COVID situation, we're seeing those that have invested are winning, and the field, frankly, is going to thin. The folks who are, and you see it. I mean, there's been dozens of bankruptcies here in the United States in the last 6 months. J.C. Penney and J. Crew and lots of others. And these are big, well-known retailers in the United States. And some of them have invested in e-commerce, but they haven't gone far enough. And the product ultimately is also a big part of this consideration. How are they sourcing product? If they only differentiate on product, it's the age of the department store is over. And so this is it's just a different world we're in. And in my opinion, this is a brand defining moment for companies, retailers, and brands. Because of what's happening with COVID, other things are becoming more important to the consumer and the business buyer.
Yeah, so the one advice I try to give to those brick and mortar store owners a couple of years ago was, okay, try to sell your store, like your the real estate value, and buy Amazon stock. I don't know if one of these store owners followed my advice, like from a financial perspective, this would have been, I think, a good advice.
Yeah.
But from a strategic investment, I can understand why they did not follow it. So maybe let's take a moment like with big warehouses. So we have the similar examples in Europe, kind of different businesses, but you might have heard of Karstadt Kaufhof, which is like in Central Europe, one of the biggest warehouse business. So would you then assume there's like a point of no return when it was too late for Sears to invest in online? And if so, when was this point?
Yeah. Well, I mean, Sears did. In fact, it's funny you mentioned that because, in my book, it's the first case study I mentioned is Sears. And I think it's a funny analogy you said. So I think, yes, there's a point at which, unfortunately, it's too late. And for many retailers here in the U.S., that point has passed. If you haven't invested significantly already, you have nothing to build on. You're in a world of pain right now. And so I think yes, for Sears, that's an interesting case study because for many years, I think what did in Sears was more of the organizational silos that they had in place, and they weren't able to take enough action quickly enough. And I think a lot of U.S. companies suffer from that. One thing I am seeing retailers do, though, and I see this playing out in the B2B side as well, is a lot of them are doubling down on their product strategy, and some of them are investing heavily in private label products, or in some cases buying their suppliers. Because if you think about what traditionally has differentiated a company, a reseller or retailer, price and selection, that's quite frankly, those have gone away. This is the age of transparency. Consumers and business buyers can see things. They can see the price, the information. They have more buying choices than ever. And as a result, the product itself is what really differentiates, in my opinion. And so, you look at a lot of retailers coming out with private label products. I mean, even Amazon, right? Amazon has 500 product label brands of their own, exclusives. And so if we take a look at that trend, I think that is one way that that retailers can differentiate is by delivering on experiences we've been talking about, but also on the product, which is differentiated, which takes a change in thinking. It's a different business than you may have been in historically as a retailer. Okay, are you seeing that in Europe or no?
Yes, so I think the point of no return was like long ago for most retailers. So now retailers some are investing like in a mobile solution, whatever, but they're like investing not because out of a strong position, they're investing out of a desperate position because they're losing so much traffic and revenue in the all channels, and now they just like at a website, and it's not like from a user centered perspective, and even like on a website level. So lots of we call it e-commerce 1.0 generation business model. So the e-commerce business models that became live in the 2000s, the first consumer electronics online stores, like the first shoe online stores, really focused on e-commerce. They lost against Zappos, Amazon, and other much more platform kind of approaches. So it's not getting easier. So it's getting harder and harder and harder to join the game. But of course, like not even Amazon is right in everything, and there's a chance. And in Europe, I try to sum it up like though in the following thesis. So I say there's like either you're like a dominant provider, retailer in your niche, you really dominate the audio sector or the expensive camera sector or hiking sector. Maybe that's something where REI is really strong. Or you're a big marketplace. So these two business models do have a decent chance to create a stable customer relation.
Yep.
If you're not part of these two kind of business models in online, you're actually only like a logistics company to then REI or to Amazon. You're just like deliver a product that eventually will be exchanged by another provider, right? And then that's kind of a logistics game. So the biggest will win. The one who's owning the industry sectors in China will win eventually, and that's what we are seeing. And what's happening right now in Europe is it's happening even faster than I would have expected. So we see bankruptcy on a level like in like 1 year that we've seen aggregated like in 5 years before, and even that speed is increasing. That's so. Would you also share this view for the US market, either become marketplace or dominant niche player?
Well, I think Alex, a great point you made. Okay, so put it in context. I read a study the other day that said almost 50% of U.S. consumers are buying from brands they've never bought from before because of the pandemic. Loyalty is gone right now, and this is a moment in time for the U.S. market where it's almost up for grabs. If you've done a good job, and you were talking about the niche market, I describe that as someone who's very good at almost specialty retail, or someone who is, and if you think about what we call DNVBs here in the U.S., digitally native vertical brands, they're doing it well, and that's exactly the business model they have. They go into a niche, they find pain, right? They find something that a company historically has not done well. They build a direct-to-consumer retail model using e-commerce. They understand the consumer at an intimate level from the very first time they go into business, and they build that intimate connection. And I completely agree with you. I mean, we can take for example in the U.S. The bedding industry. Okay, take the mattress business. I don't know what it's like in the EU, but the business here in the United States of buying a mattress as a consumer for years has been very difficult. And it's almost like buying a used car. You go to the mattress store.
Same.
You can't tell the difference between the products. It's all convoluted. The power's in the hand of the retailer, not in the hands of the consumer. Yeah. And
there's always an offer for.
That's right. There's always an offer, but but this whole crop of pure play DNVB companies, digitally native vertical brand companies, has cropped up over the last few years, and they've taken a completely different approach. Very transparent. Here's what our mattresses are made of. Here's the prices. Here's 3 levels. They've simplified it. Very simple. 3 levels or 5 levels of mattress based on how you like to sleep. Here's what's in the mattresses. Compare them. Free shipping, free delivery, free returns, no hassles. The pain, they eliminated all the pain the consumer had for decades about buying mattresses. And guess what? These companies, there's 5, 6, 7 of them that are over $100 million in revenue in no time. Satva, Purple, Casper, there's a load of them. And what's interesting, the dynamic that's interesting that's happening is the traditional mattress companies are now buying these mattress companies. So there was I think it was Serta or Simmons, one of the big mattress companies bought a company called Tuft & Needle. Why did they buy them? They bought one of the DMVBs because they needed to get the talent in the building that understood how to do this and how to evolve into this direct-to-consumer model and how to tie more tightly to the consumer and understand what they really needed out of the experience. And so I 100% agree with you. If you're a retailer, traditional, stuck in your ways and stuck in how you've done things for decades, you may have to do something drastic like acquire someone because you may not be able to get there fast enough. And that's exactly what Serta did.
But even for acquisition, it was too late for some of the mattress companies in Europe. So one of the main mattress retail companies in Europe was losing market share to not Casper. Casper was not successful in Europe, but Casper similar businesses, much more cost efficient. So they never businesses that never sponsored podcasters, for example, like Casper did for for millions of dollars. But they even sponsored my podcast in Germany. So, there was one business called Matratzen Concord, which was like the main retailer in Central Europe with, I think, over 1,000 stores. And this business was almost bankrupt and then sold for 5 million, not 5 billion, for 5 million.
Wow.
Though that's like the value of 5,000 mattresses. So, so it is even too late for acquiring those businesses, partially because of the inflated valuations in the e-commerce market, of course, partially because they just ran out of cash. And I'd like to go back to one example you mentioned with Home Depot, this click and collect thing. Though there's like one dominant consumer electronics company in Europe called MediaMarkt with 20 billion euros in revenue. And they claim they have like 45% click and collect orders, but the share of like the pure e-commerce orders is not going up quick enough, and those click and collect orders can never replace like the revenue they are losing on their in their brick and mortar stores, which are like super expensive with super expensive rent and personnel. So and that's why we are looking like from a European perspective pretty much on those pure play companies like Zalando, which are like very successful in fashion, like Thomann, which was a retailer, brick and mortar retailer before, and is now 100% pure e-commerce in audio, professional audio equipment. So, do you see Zalando or Thomann or About You kind of cases in the US? So, of course, we've all learned about like Zappos, which was acquired by Amazon, but are there dominant online players in like one category now outperforming the brick and mortar retail stores?
Oh yeah, you see it in a variety of categories. I spent 5 years in the home furnishings business. I was a CEO of an early stage high growth. This is 15 years ago, and I used to compete with this little company called Wayfair. I don't know if you guys ever heard of Wayfair.
Yes, very successful now in Europe too.
Yeah, Wayfair is doing billions, I think 3 or 4 billion now in annual revenue, and it's all online. And so having spent a lot of time in that market, they have done a lot of things right and better, frankly, than some of the others like Amazon and others, to customize an experience for a vertical that's meeting the consumer's needs. Okay, so what are they doing differently? Well, they're all the things that have to do with when a furniture purchase online, which, by the way, is very difficult because you're shipping big, bulky product, right? So the fulfillment piece of it is quite difficult. So what they've done is they have incorporated a lot of those elements into their business model. They've incorporated all the different elements of buying something which is very tangible into their online experience. So they allow, for example, indications of freight. How long is it going to take? I mean, some of these sound basic, but they have like measurements of the length of time it's going to take to get to you. What are the specific elements of the furniture as it relates to style, how it goes with other products? There's a lot of sort of unique things about the furniture purchase, which require a customization of, for example, a room builder. How do you build things, bring things together into a room to create a cohesive look? So these are the kinds of things that some of the other, that take a definite focus on a category and an understanding of how that consumer or B2B buyer buys in that category. And so Wayfair's done a good job of that. They've also brought in a lot of assortment, and they've done a good job of cleaning data and categorizing it in a way that makes it easy for customers to find the product, to sort the product, to use their search functions, et cetera. So there's a lot of different components that go into doing it well. And I mean, Wayfair is probably the best example of that in terms of reaching scale in a specific market. There's another one called Hauzz, Hauzz, here in the U.S., that does a similar type of thing, although they have an interesting business.
They kind of aggregate like interior designers, right?
Well, kind of. So they started with content, and this is an interesting business model too that's evolved here, starting with content and evolving into commerce. So they started with idea. It was an idea site. It was where people and designers could contribute ideas. People could comment on them to get inspiration for their rooms, for their home decor. in their case, they added, maybe 5 years ago, they added commerce, and they added a marketplace model. So it's similar in some ways to what Wayfair's done, but in a different way. Wayfair started with commerce. Now they have some content. House started with content, and now they have commerce. So, but I think the similarity is they both created a bespoke experience for the consumer looking for home furnishings products, and in some degree, the professional looking for home furnishings products. And I think that connection comes through on their websites when you're shopping there. And so I think that's an advantage. I would agree with you. There's an advantage a company can have by creating that experience and then competing with the traditional retailers and taking share from the traditional retailers. So yeah, that model works here.
Okay, got it. Before we are looking more into the detailed effects of COVID, maybe going back to my initial question. So, do you have any hope for the standard mom and pop shop with 2 or 3 stores in shopping malls?
Well, if they're in shopping malls, maybe not. Unless they're
okay.
There's the latest statistic, Alex, is 100,000 stores here in the U.S. closing in the next 4 years. 100,000.
How many stores are there?
100,000 stores.
But how many stores are there in total? If there's
I don't know.
100 million, that's not a problem, right?
That's a good question, right? Good point. I'll get back to you with that stat. But that's a lot of stores. And so you think about if you think about, is there hope for the mom and pop? Number one, look, yes, there is, in the sense that I think the maxims of business, of good business, can even be can translate down to small businesses. In other words, if you are relating to your customer, ultimately, what's good business about? It's about serving the need of a customer. Depending on the business you're in, if you're a small mom and pop store, if you're doing a good job meeting the need of a specific customer locally, yeah, you can stay in business. But you have to make sure you're focused on something that's unique and serves that customer. If you're not, it's not going to work. And so, do they need to evolve and become digital? Some of them, in some ways, do. In the U.S., we have lots of. Do you guys have Yelp in the EU, for example? You know what that is?
Yes,
Yelp.
But it kind of failed in the EU. It was important for a couple of years ago, but it's not important anymore. It's dominated by Google.
Well, okay. So similar concept though, probably Google in the EU. Here in the U.S., small businesses live and die by their Yelp ratings. You have a good Yelp rating, you're going to get all kinds of leads and customers through the web, right? So people go to Yelp when they want a local business and they search for it. And Yelp is a way that these businesses can use to capture customers, to stay differentiated, to stay in top of mind. And the businesses that are doing that, they have to be digitally aware. They have to bring in the digital aspects, and Yelp is a good way to do it for the business. So I don't want to tell you that hope is lost for mom and pops. If you're in a mall, it's going to be harder because malls are declining in relevance. So.
Okay, I know, from a US point of view, how to sugarcoat things. I'd like to translate it in the European answer. There is no hope anymore. And if I have to sum it up, there was a publication from the Association of Store Owners in Germany 2 weeks ago when it came to store closing effects due to COVID. And just in Germany, they expect 50,000 stores to close. So the COVID effects are in Germany we've kind of leapfrogged 2 to 3 years in e-commerce development. So every category went up like crazy, some 100%, some 50%. So especially the food, the area of e-food grew a lot. So and of course, one of the effects is that more companies are spending now money to e-commerce companies and infrastructure companies like us. So what was the effect in the US then? So or you're in the middle of COVID still. So we are behind first wave in Europe, I would say, and now try to avoid second wave, but nobody knows what's going to happen. But it seems to be still middle and first wave in the US. Heavy COVID.
Yeah, we haven't, unfortunately, Alex, we have not surpassed the first wave here. Yeah. We're still in the first wave, and it's getting worse, quite frankly. Our people are going back to school, and it's just, it's becoming, unfortunately, not a good situation. So what's the effect on business? Well, the first thing is that, as I mentioned earlier, we're seeing a lot more e-commerce activity and penetration, right? So we've jumped from 16 to over 30% e-commerce penetration in terms of where people are ordering. The other thing that's happening is a lot of people now, and it's all related, people are working from home. 75% of the workforce as of 2 months ago was working from home, that could work from home. And that actually, a survey I recently read, that is expected to continue, not at those levels, but 30% of the workforce is still expected to be working from home a year from now. So what companies are discovering is that it's now actually easy. It's somewhat easy to have people work from home. And as they're doing that, they're realizing, heck, I don't need to spend all this money on office space. I can have a mobile workforce. People like working from home. And so what does that do? All those trends working together. I mean, that's pushing more people to buy through e-commerce. So number one, I think that the impact is e-commerce as a channel has become more important. People are also discovering how to buy things that they've never bought online before. As I mentioned earlier, 46% of the population is buying from brands they've never purchased from before now because of COVID. So it creates an opportunity for them to discover things. I'll use grocery as an example. The grocery e-commerce is up something like 250% in the United States. And if you think about some of the businesses that are embracing that, like Walmart, for example, Walmart is recently announced something. They're doing something with a company called Instacart, which is an online delivery service. And if you think about, if you start creating experiences for consumers in this market that allow you as a consumer to discover you as a brand, to discover everything you have, that's a game changer in certain markets. So Walmart's been competing against Amazon for years, and they're still relatively small in comparison of in terms of overall e-commerce penetration. Amazon's 50% of the e-commerce penetration in the United States. Walmart, as they bring in services like this with grocery on fire, meaning more people going to e-commerce, they create a willingness of customers to try Walmart that may have never tried them before, that may have never tried them as an alternative to Amazon. Walmart's rolling out something called Walmart Plus, which is their loyalty program, which is designed to compete with Amazon Prime. And frankly, Walmart has some assets Amazon doesn't. It has a lot of stores, and it has a very strong grocery presence, much stronger than Amazon's. And so, the dynamics are shifting. People willing to try new retailers, try new brands, and these impacts are going to be felt for years, because the consumer may make choices that'll last beyond COVID. So I think there's so many different levels where that we're seeing here. I mean, the acceleration of bankruptcies of apparel retail, for example. Amazon in the U.S. is the number one apparel retailer in the country by volume, number one, and that's across all categories, underwear and.
But I also read during COVID that the market. So you talked about the market share of Amazon, roughly like 50%. Like they lost relatively against Target and Walmart because they grew much stronger, like
yes.
On their level, and therefore like the market share is not distributed a little bit like different. So would you say then that Target and Walmart, they really stand a chance against Amazon with their strategies?
I think so. So here in the U.S., I don't think brick and mortar is dead. I think it's changing. I think you're going to see the strongest companies survive. I think you're going to see a thinning of the pack. You're already seeing it. I think you're going to see those who have invested significantly in digital and omnichannel, like Target. With they just posted a strong. I have the numbers here somewhere. A very strong quarter. Those are the businesses that are going to survive and thrive through this, because they are creating convenience for the customer. They're accommodating the customer during this time. Look, a thinning was already happening here in the U.S. market. You've seen these retail bankruptcies for the last 5 years. It's just COVID is doing nothing but accelerating it. I heard one. I think it was McKinsey, a study I recently read that talked about 10 years of acceleration in 5 months, and I believe that. We're seeing it. It's incredible.
And okay, so you're more hopeful, like for brick and mortar companies than I am, but maybe that's just because we haven't seen so many success stories in the German market or European market, especially not the markets where Amazon is so dominant. Definitely, we see some success stories in markets like the Netherlands, Sweden, Poland, for example, where Amazon wasn't active for like a decade, and now they're start spending money. But we haven't seen success cases from companies with brick and mortar DNA trying to challenge Amazon or Zalando or About You or Thomann. So that's actually like where our thinking comes from. If you was asking a brick and mortar retailer or somebody from the Association of Brick and Mortar Retailers, of course, multi-channel is still the thing. Yeah, right. Invest in a website and everything turns out good eventually. But maybe let's focus for the last like a couple of minutes on a special area that was not so much in the spotlight of e-commerce like for 2 decades, which is B2B commerce. That's where your book came from, and yes. I just went to your book page trying to find out what the book is what the book is especially about. Can you before we deep dive into the topics, can you give us some background information? Why did you write a book about like B2B e-commerce, something that is occasionally actually not happening so much, but then if you're like deep diving into numbers, it's already bigger than B2C?
That's the thing, Alex. It is happening, at least in the US. I can't speak as much about EU, but in the US it is happening, and people are winning market share because they're taking advantage of it. It is 2.5-3 times the size of retail e-commerce. And the reason I wrote the book is because, I got into the B2B side of e-commerce about 5 years ago. And I was looking for things to help my clients understand what they ought to do. And there was nothing really in the market to give them. They asked me for books. And so I decided to write one based on my experience, not only on the retail side and everything that I did right and wrong for years, because, I made a lot of mistakes during 17 years of running e-commerce. Fortunately, I had some good successes as well. And, the thing that stuck out to me when I got into B2B was that, these folks need a resource. So I decided to write a book. It's 400 pages long. It's 12 chapters, and it's really every aspect of B2B, of bringing e-commerce to a B2B organization. Alex, the key thing about B2B is that it incorporates a lot of the elements of B2C e-commerce, but it can be so transformational for a business because it revolutionizes their operation, their ability to market to customers, and to deepen their share of wallet with customers. B2B is different than B2C in the sense that you have usually a smaller set of customers you're selling to, but you know them. In B2B, there's usually a relationship, right? And so by knowing them, you're able to go deeper in personalization. You're able to go deeper in understanding how they're using the products. It's like on the B2C side when we talked about some of those DNVBs. It's about an intimate relationship with the customer that's facilitated by e-commerce, and it reinforces the physical relationship. So I wrote it because e-commerce can be truly transformational, and I have to say, some of these businesses, a manufacturer, for example, that I profile in the book, a company called Illumina, they make medical products. They're a $3 billion company. They make genomics research equipment. They're a global company. They implemented e-commerce. It's going to be 50% of their business. They're a $3.5 billion company. They launched e-commerce 3 years ago, right? So think about a digital transformation. When you do it right, this can go far beyond what a retailer can do necessarily. So it's because a lot of it's because the customer is demanding it. So anyway, I can go on for a while on this topic, as you can tell.
We can stay for this topic for a while, because our software is actually catered for B2B commerce. So we are working with a lot of B2B commerce or B2B companies in Europe, and so what we are seeing is still different. So most of these companies grew very successful with with a field force kind of sales approach. And they just went out and showed their product, and they built like a person-to-person kind of relationship approach. And then the first thing they try to digitize is and then the companies, if you look at the org chart, 50% of the people working in the company are part of the field force, like handling the field force or being in the field.
That's right.
So, and then when digitalization starts, so people those companies, and we are getting like 1 RFP per day from a B2B company.
Mm-hmm.
I would say 90% of those RFPs are not centered around the customers. It's rather around like this kind of feed force, how not to blame them for like the cost inefficiency. So we want to do e-commerce. We know we have to sell directly, but when it comes to new customers, but Alex or Brian, when we start today, like selling directly, then, all these like directors of the field force, like yelling at me and saying, okay, we don't sell a shit. And then companies running out of business. So that's like what the RFPs are structured. So you literally can see how they try to navigate around this conflict of interest. So how do you manage this conflict? And I'm pretty sure the same in the US. How do you manage this conflict in the US?
Absolutely. And I work with some companies that sell globally too. Illumina is a good example of that. That's a great point. I have a whole chapter on that, actually. It's called Aligning Selling Channels. So e-commerce and digital transformation is not necessarily easy for B2B companies because they have been selling in a traditional sense for many years, and that is exactly for one of the reasons you're talking about. The sales force views, if they're not involved in the process, they don't understand. If they don't understand the benefits of e-commerce, they can fight and will fight against e-commerce. They'll think of it as it's the death of a salesman, to quote the famous Arthur Miller book. It's going to compete against me. It's going to take my business away. When actually what happens is when the sales functions are aligned, it makes the sales team more efficient, because what it does is it pushes tasks that they've handled manually, like checking order status or for a customer, or placing a repeat order for a customer, or handling some kind of a process, or checking inventory status, things like that. That can all be pushed to the web, and the salesperson can still earn commission on the sale. That's the important thing. Is it's about the organization evolving its process. The technology, as you well know, is there to handle these things. It's more about aligning the organization, and that's why one of the I think the second chapter of my book is all about leadership. This has to come from the top of the organization. If you look at the companies that have been successful here in the U.S. and internationally with e-commerce, it's come from the CEO. It's come from the board. It's not coming from a business unit. It's not coming from the IT department. It's coming from the top of the organization, and they're forcing change. This is not an easy thing to do. And I think there's a lot of lessons from retail here, Sears, for these B2B companies. Because look, your buyer, at least in the US, your buyer is going to be almost completely a millennial, which is someone born between 1980 and 2000. These people are digital natives. They come to your site. They want an Amazon-like experience. You're not delivering it. They're looking somewhere else. But the companies that are engaging in this, and this isn't just big companies, Alex. I have a distributor that I interviewed for the book. That they're a $20 million company. They almost doubled the business by adding e-commerce, and it's because they offered the convenience of e-commerce ahead of their competitors. It's incredible. So these are the reasons I wrote the book, is because the transformation is really amazing when it's done right. And it needs to align the sales force, to your point. You can't do it without having the sales force involved and aligned with the effort, or you won't succeed, guaranteed.
But I agree, 100% agree with all your points. But in most cases, the CEO or CIO or whoever is going to be responsible for this kind of commerce project is not a digital native, not driving the change process, because he has only like 3 years left on his contract, maybe, or maybe he's not able anymore, like from a cognitive skill level, to invest in such a thing. And most of them are managers; they're not the owners anymore. If you're like talking with owners, it's a totally different game. But most of them are managers; they have to manage risks. And the only thing and when it comes to changing your sales channels, that's kind of a very risky thing to do. So, is there like a shortcut for like this kind of org transformation, so you can so you have an alignment with the CEO?
Well, the shortcut is that your competitor is going to do it and put you out of business. I hate to be so blunt about it, but I mean, just look at the retail sector, guys. I mean, if you look at what's happened in retail and how much carnage has been caused there by e-commerce, the same thing is coming to B2B markets. if you're not paying attention to this, then your competitor is going to. So I agree with you, Alex. There's 50% in the U.S. There's 50% of B2B companies that don't have an e-commerce capability. 50%. There's 50% though that do, and there's people that are waking up to this. And I talk in the book. I talk about the fact that, to your point, it's easy for a B2B company, or any company for that matter, to become complacent if business is just good enough, meaning I'm growing just enough, or maybe I'm flat, but I'm still really profitable, because there's a lot of profit in B2B, right? The business just good enough. I don't have to change. I don't have to enter the uncomfortable space of making change in my organization. I'm 3 years away from retirement. I'm not going to mess up the boat. Yeah, okay. The challenge, though, is that things are now changing, and COVID is the loudest call to action, I think, ever in our lifetime for B2B companies to transform themselves and to start using digital. But there's no replacement for leadership. If your leadership isn't going to take action, you're not going to see digital transformation if they're not behind it. And every instance, I have 30 case studies in the book. Every instance where there's been successful e-commerce and digital transformation, leadership has been behind it.
Okay, I'd like to make the following proposal. So I haven't read your book yet, so we can make an exchange. So I send you the e-commerce book, which is mine, and I will buy your book. And maybe we can do like a second recording where we go like case by case. Are all those cases success cases, or some cases where it has been a little bit tougher?
Oh, sure. I mean, it's always tough, right? None of them are done. So, success cases, you can count success in that you've gotten return on investment. You're seeing high trajectory as it relates to e-commerce. And there's certainly a lot of elements, and there's certainly a lot of companies that have had that kind of success. But there's a lot of companies that are learning too, and they're learning from their mistakes. And so, yeah, there's some lessons learned too, for sure.
Would you be willing to record like a second episode which we're going to use for going case by case through your book? Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
I can give you some good ones. Yeah.
Then I invite you to do this. So I need a couple of days to read through your case studies, and then I'd like to deep dive into the learnings of B2B, because I think when it comes to B2B e-commerce transformation in Europe, especially in Germany, which is like B2B super heavy player, it's like we are like at 2%. And in 50% of the cases that are obvious already, cannot do it because of leadership issues,
right?
or field force issues, so to say. So it was super exciting to hear your views. I would propose then a second episode in a couple of weeks from now.
Awesome.
Where we go through your B2B cases. Maybe I can also throw some B2B cases from Europe in the pond, and then let's see what we can learn, and maybe we find some common success factors which help them, our customers. Thank you, Brian.
That'd be great, Alex. Thank you. I look forward to that.
I hope you liked this episode, and you will tune in again when we are talking about the specific B2B success cases and some cases that didn't work out at all with Brian Beck again in 2 weeks.